Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a world where emperors strutted, slaves whispered, and queens held more secrets than your high school group chat. Imagine you're lying there, lights dim, phone on the pillow beside you, and you're about to fall into a story of rulers whose nightly routines would make today's tabloids sweat. You think getting high today means a vape pen or a questionable gummy from a gas station. Well, in the ancient world, queens and courtiers were experimenting with potions, herbs, and even crocodile dung for skin care. Yeah, you heard me right. If Sephora sold that now, you'd probably run screaming. And before we go too far, here's the housekeeping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, it helps. But only click if you want more midnight gossip from ancient times. Oh, and while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when everyone's listening. One last thing, you'll get a quiz within half an hour. If you're still awake when it drops, prove it. Comment your answer. No cheating with Google, I'll know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're wandering down a Roman street at dusk. The air smells of olive oil lamps, and too many people packed into one space. Behind closed doors, noblewomen are applying miracle creams to their faces, some mixed with crushed pearls, others with, you guessed it, crocodile dung. Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen who had Rome wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger, was rumored to use that strange concoction as sunscreen. Did it work? Maybe. Did it make gossip spread faster than wildfire on TikTok? Absolutely. See, Roman queens and empresses weren't just rulers' wives sitting in marble palaces. They were influencers, political players, and, honestly, drama magnets. Cleopatra in particular lived at the intersection of power and gossip. One day, she's sailing down the Nile dressed as the goddess Isis, draped in gold, perfumed sails catching the breeze. The next, she's having dinner with Julius Caesar. Or, rumor had it, much more than dinner. Historians still argue whether she seduced him purely for love or for politics. Personally, if someone offered you half the Roman Empire as a side dish, you'd probably at least stay for dessert. But Cleopatra wasn't alone in the game of curious beauty hacks and whispered scandals. Roman queens in general had their reputations built, twisted, and destroyed in the public eye. It wasn't just what they did, but what people thought they did. For example, imagine if Instagram existed back then. One blurry shot of Cleopatra pouring wine for Antony, captioned, "Eyes power couple?" And the entire empire would lose sleep. And while we're chuckling about crocodile dung sunscreen, there's an actual serious fact behind it. Ancient Egyptians really did use strange mixtures for health and beauty. Some recipes included lead-based cosmetics, which, spoiler, are not great for long life. Historians debate whether Cleopatra died from poison, snakebite, or political stress, but maybe years of lead eyeliner didn't help. Still, you picture yourself stepping into her palace. Marble columns rise, scented oils burn, servants glide past. Cleopatra reclines with a sly smile, holding the room's attention the way a Netflix show holds yours at 2 a.m. She's dazzling but dangerous. Everyone in that chamber knows. Get too close and you might end up famous, or dead. And here's the quirky tidbit. Roman gossip wasn't just whispered in back alleys. It was carved into graffiti. Archaeologists have found wall scribbles accusing queens of affairs, greed, or worse. Imagine someone sharp-tagging your love life on the wall of a cafe. Yeah, you'd want to crawl into a hole too. You walk through the streets of Pompeii and see graffiti that literally says things like, "Julia is a heartbreaker." If the queens were fair game for street gossip, you can bet people wrote spicier things about Cleopatra and her Roman rivals. Back to the palace. Cleopatra is testing perfumes, hosting banquets where the wine flows so freely, you start to worry about tomorrow's hangover. She once bet Mark Antony that she could spend an absurd amount of money on a single meal. You know how she won? She dissolved one of her enormous pearls in vinegar and drank it. Try pulling that move at Taco Bell tonight. Historians still argue whether the chemistry works the way Pliny described, but the story stuck, and that's the point. Whether true or not, people believed Cleopatra was extravagant beyond imagination. So why call this the story of perverted queens? Because in Rome's eyes, perversion wasn't always about sex. It was about power, bending norms, and flaunting extravagance. A queen bathing in donkey milk, or one hosting late-night parties, was shocking not just for what they did in private, but for daring to live beyond the rules written for women. You keep strolling, the cobblestones under your sandals warm from the day. The city hums with gossip. Behind every window, a story waits. Some of those stories were true, others pure rumor, but either way, they shaped history. The real question: if you lived back then, would you join the gossip chain, whispering about queens as you waited in line at the baths? Or would you risk it, aligning yourself with one of these dangerous women, hoping her power would rub off on you? You probably wouldn't last a day. You wander deeper into the candlelit corridors of Roman power, and if Cleopatra was the glamorous queen who played her cards with pearls and perfume, Messalina is the one who makes you whisper, "Wait, she did what?" The marble halls around you echo with footsteps, and in the shadows of Emperor Claudius's palace, his young wife is spinning webs of intrigue so wild they sound like the plot of a trashy TV drama. Except here's the catch: it's real history, or at least, the kind of history that gossip never lets die. Messalina was the third wife of Claudius, the emperor who had a limp, a stutter, and, depending on who you asked, either the patience of a saint or the cluelessness of a sitcom dad. He loved his books, his scholarship, and probably would have been happier as a librarian. Meanwhile, his wife? She had the energy of someone who was absolutely not satisfied sitting quietly by a scroll rack. According to ancient sources, Messalina was barely in her 20s when she married Claudius, who was much older. And from there, the rumors practically write themselves. Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius painted her as a woman with an appetite for lovers that could rival an entire season of Love Island. Was it exaggerated? Almost certainly. But it doesn't take much for gossip to snowball in a city where everyone's business gets carved into stone or sung about by street performers. One infamous tale says that Messalina secretly married another man while still legally married to Claudius. Yeah, you heard that right. An emperor's wife allegedly held a whole second wedding ceremony, complete with guests, witnesses, and a groom named Gaius Silius. Imagine the audacity. You're throwing rice at the happy couple while the sitting emperor is technically her actual husband. Historians still argue whether this was political conspiracy or just jaw-dropping recklessness. Either way, it makes your neighbor's messy divorce look like a quiet picnic. But here's the thing. Rome loved to exaggerate scandal, especially about women. Some scholars today believe Messalina was a victim of smear campaigns, her enemies painting her as a perverted queen to tarnish Claudius by extension. Others say, nope, she really was that reckless, and her downfall was earned. You picture the Senate debating it like a late-night Reddit thread. Messalina, innocent victim or ancient world's biggest drama queen? You stroll through the palace gardens, moonlight casting long shadows across marble statues. Somewhere in the dark, Messalina is plotting. She knows Claudius is distracted with empire business, grain shipments, building projects, legal codes, and that leaves her free to, well, allegedly live her best double life. Rome whispered that her influence over Claudius was so strong, she could convince him to sign death warrants with a bat of her eyelashes. Political rivals? Gone. Rivals in love? Also gone. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Ancient gossip claimed Messalina once competed against a professional courtesan in a marathon of lovers to see who could outlast the other. Supposedly, she won. Is it true? Probably not, but the fact people believed it says everything about how Rome painted her reputation. If Twitter existed back then, the hashtag Messalina challenge would have been trending worldwide. You picture her walking past the Senate chambers, senators whispering into their togas as she glides by. Some admired her beauty, others feared her power, but everyone agreed she had Claudius wrapped around her finger. At least until she didn't. Because every Roman scandal story ends the same way, with betrayal, exposure, and a messy downfall. One night, while Claudius was away in Ostia, supposedly checking on the grain supply, Rome needed bread like you need Wi-Fi. Messalina and Silius allegedly staged their full-blown wedding. Music, flowers, the whole 9 yards. Maybe it was political ambition. They thought Claudius could be overthrown, and she'd still sit as empress next to Silius. Or maybe, and this is the gossip version, she just wanted what she wanted, and caution wasn't in her vocabulary. When Claudius found out, his reaction wasn't the gentle stammering of a scholar anymore. His freedmen, loyal servants like Narcissus, convinced him the betrayal was too much. They claimed Rome itself could collapse if this scandal wasn't crushed. You can almost hear Narcissus whispering, "She married another man, sire. The empire laughs at you." And Claudius, stunned, finally acted. The end came quickly. Messalina tried to plead, sending messages, begging for a chance to explain. Claudius hesitated. Maybe he still loved her, maybe he was too stunned to decide. But his advisors didn't give him the chance. Soldiers were dispatched. Messalina, cornered in the gardens, was offered the chance to take her own life. Ancient writers say she faltered, unable to do it, so a soldier carried out the deed for her. Fact: Messalina really was executed in 48 CE. Debate: whether her wild reputation was truth, exaggeration, or propaganda. Quirky tidbit: a Roman satirist later joked that her ghost still roamed the palace, looking for new, midnight marriages. If you believe in haunted houses, imagine that as your Airbnb review. And through all of this, Claudius remained emperor, stunned but alive, and remarried soon after to Agrippina the Younger, another queen with an equally scandalous reputation, who we'll meet in the next section. You get the sense Claudius, poor guy, never caught a break in the wife department. So here you are, drifting in the candle glow, realizing that Roman queens weren't just background figures. They were headline makers, walking controversies, and sometimes the reason entire empires shifted direction. You stretch thinking, if Messalina lived today, would she be on reality TV? Would TMZ be parked outside her villa, cameras rolling? Or maybe she'd be an Instagram star, posting cryptic captions like, "Sometimes you just need a new husband sparkles ring dot." Either way, you don't believe these things happened, except they did, or at least they were believed to. And belief is often just as powerful as truth. The torches flicker as you pass through yet another Roman hallway, and if Messalina's story was all about reckless passion, Agrippina's is about cold calculation. You can almost hear the scrape of bronze bowls, the hiss of boiling water, and the clink of jars filled with powders that could heal, or kill. You step softly, because in Agrippina's world, dinner wasn't just about filling your stomach. It was about deciding who lived long enough to see dessert. Agrippina the Younger was the niece of Emperor Claudius, and yes, also his wife. Ancient Rome did not exactly play by the dating rules, you know. If you think your family reunions are awkward, try explaining that marriage arrangement over lasagna. But for Agrippina, every relationship was a tool. She was determined to secure the throne for her young son Nero, and if that meant bending rules, rewriting traditions, or, according to rumor, slipping something into a goblet of wine, well, so be it. She grew up watching the ruthless dance of Roman politics. Her own mother and father were caught up in power struggles. As a child, she learned quickly that in Rome, being timid was just another way of being forgotten. By the time she became empress, she knew exactly what was at stake. Either you controlled the narrative, or the narrative controlled you. Now here's the mainstream historical fact. Agrippina wielded unprecedented political influence as a woman in Rome. She sat alongside Claudius in public ceremonies, something wives had never done before. Coins were minted with her face beside his, a visual symbol that she wasn't just the emperor's partner. She was his co-ruler. That alone would have been enough to scandalize traditionalists who thought women should stay in the shadows. But Agrippina wasn't satisfied with being a sidekick. She wanted her son Nero on the throne, and she wanted him there fast. That's when the gossip kitchen started bubbling. Roman historians, never ones to avoid a juicy tale, claimed Agrippina turned to poison to speed things along. Claudius, they said, was growing unpredictable, maybe leaning toward naming someone else as his heir. Suddenly, stories swirl that Agrippina enlisted her household staff, including a professional poisoner named Locusta, to prepare a fatal dish. One version of the rumor says Claudius was served mushrooms at dinner. Delicious, fragrant, and allegedly laced with death. Another version claims the first attempt didn't quite finish him, so Agrippina had a doctor help him along with a poison porridge. Historians still argue whether Claudius died of natural illness or assassination. The sources are murky, and Roman writers loved making powerful women the villains. But the tale stuck. From then on, mushrooms became known in Rome as the food of the gods, a wink at the meal that supposedly carried an emperor into the afterlife. And here's your quirky tidbit. The poisoner Locusta became so famous, or infamous, that later emperors actually hired her as a royal consultant. Imagine court poisoner as your LinkedIn title. It's like being a celebrity chef, but instead of people asking for recipes, they're asking how to spice up their enemy's soup. You creep further into the palace kitchen in your imagination. Clay pots simmering, herbs hanging in bundles, the smell of honey and wine in the air. But in one corner, a locked cabinet glows in torchlight. Inside, glass flasks shimmer with powders, belladonna, hemlock, arsenic. Agrippina's supposed arsenal. Did she really keep such a cabinet? Maybe. Maybe not. But Rome believed it, and sometimes belief has sharper teeth than fact. Picture the senators gossiping after Claudius's death in 54 CE. Did you hear? Mushrooms. She poisoned him. Another senator leans in. No, it was porridge. A third whispers. Don't repeat this, but I heard she smothered him with a pillow. The truth fades, the whispers remain. And then comes the chilling part. You glance at young Nero, her son, suddenly declared emperor at just 16 years old. Agrippina has succeeded. She sits beside him during audiences, answers petitions in his name, and for a while, it seems she might rule through him as the power behind the throne. But here's where fate, irony, and maybe karma enter the chat. Nero, once her golden boy, grew tired of his mother's grip. At first, he pushed her aside gently. Later, not so gently. Their relationship soured into something Shakespeare would have written if he'd had more snakes and fewer iambic pentameters. Agrippina, once the feared mastermind, eventually became the target. In a moment dripping with poetic justice, Nero plotted her death. Historians say he tried to engineer a collapsible boat to drown her, but she swam to shore, dripping wet and furious. Finally, he sent assassins to finish the job. If the poison cabinet rumors were true, the irony is stark. She taught him the rules of survival, and he used them against her. You lean back, imagining her final thoughts. Was she bitter? Was she proud? Some accounts say her last words to the assassin were, "Strike my womb first," as if to say, "This is where the monster came from." Historians still argue whether she said it, But even as a legend, it's chilling. And here's another quirky angle. Agrippina had her own biography written while she was alive, basically an ancient tell-all. Sadly, it's lost. If we had it today, maybe we'd hear her side, whether she was a schemer, a survivor, or both. Instead, we only have the hostile accounts of men who despised powerful women. You stroll back out of the imaginary kitchen, wiping mushroom sauce off your fingers, realizing how fragile truth is in history. Cleopatra with her crocodile dung sunscreen, Messalina with her midnight marriage, and now Agrippina with her poison mushrooms. They all blur the line between fact and gossip. Rome didn't need reality TV. It had queens. And because I promised you, here's your audience quiz from sections 1 to 3. If you're still awake, drop your answer in the comments. Quiz. Which Roman empress was rumored to poison Emperor Claudius with mushrooms? Cleopatra, Messalina, or Agrippina? Answer it below. No cheating. Let's see who's still with me. You hear water now, lapping against the wooden hull of a boat, carrying you into the moonlit Nile. If Agrippina's kitchen smelled of poison, Cleopatra's yacht smells of roses, incense, and roasted peacock. The air is warm, heavy with perfume, and above you, linen sails ripple in the breeze. Cleopatra has entered the chat again, and this time she's not dabbling in crocodile dung skincare. Tonight, she's hosting the kind of party that would make the Hamptons look like a kid's lemonade stand. The mainstream historical fact is this: Cleopatra really did use spectacle as a political weapon. Ancient sources tell us that when she met Mark Antony on the river at Tarsus, she sailed in on a golden barge, dressed as the goddess Isis, with purple sails, silver oars, and servants fanning her with feathers. Music filled the air, incense smoked from braziers, and the crowd on the banks went wild. This wasn't just a boat ride, it was a flex. A floating PR stunt designed to make Rome's most powerful general stop in his tracks. And it worked. Antony, like Caesar before him, was hooked. But let's be real. If you or I pulled up to a date dressed as a god, the other person would probably run. Cleopatra? She got marriage proposals and half an empire out of it. You wander across the deck, marble-inlaid floors beneath your feet. Yes, rumor says she had marble floors on her ships, servants gliding past with trays of figs and honey cakes. Musicians pluck lyres, and dancers whirl in the torchlight. Cleopatra lounges on cushions, golden jewelry glinting against her skin, and Antony sits beside her, dazzled and probably a little tipsy. And here's the quirky tidbit. Cleopatra didn't just serve wine. She supposedly invented drinking games. According to Plutarch, she and Antony once bet who could spend the most on a single meal. Remember the pearl in vinegar stunt from earlier? That was one of these so-called yacht party challenges. If TikTok existed back then, you'd see Cleopatra posting, "Watch me dissolve this $30 million pearl for the LOLs." Hashtag rich girl energy. Now, historians still argue whether these yacht feasts were exaggerated propaganda by Roman writers who wanted to paint her as a decadent temptress. Some say Plutarch spiced up his stories centuries later to entertain his audience. Others believe the showmanship was very real because Cleopatra understood the power of performance. Either way, the gossip has survived 2,000 years, longer than most empires, and definitely longer than your last New Year's resolution. As the party sways on the water, you lean against the railing. The Nile reflects the stars, torches flicker along the banks, and you catch whispers of politics between gulps of wine. Cleopatra isn't just partying for fun. Every sip, every song, every extravagant flourish is calculated. She knows Antony commands legions, and she knows Rome judges her harshly as a foreign queen. To win, she must overwhelm, not just Antony's eyes, but his imagination. The crowd on shore is buzzing too. Ordinary Egyptians gather at the water's edge, dazzled by the sight. To them, Cleopatra is Isis herself, reborn. They don't see a woman manipulating a Roman general. They see a goddess making the Nile bend to her will. And honestly, you can't help but admire the hustle. There's another rumor that during one of these Nile parties, Cleopatra staged mock battles with her guests. Sailors fighting sailors, wine flowing like blood, laughter roaring as if the empire wasn't teetering on the edge of chaos. Some scholars shrug and say, maybe it's just gossip. Others point out that Antony was famously playful and indulgent, so why not? Picture it. Antony, slightly drunk, swinging a wooden sword, while Cleopatra eggs him on from her golden throne. And here comes your late-night joke. If Airbnb offered Cleopatra's barge today, the listing would read, "Private yacht, comes with live music, gourmet dining, probable entanglement in world-shaking political drama." 5-star reviews, except from Octavian. But the fun, as always in Rome, had a sharp edge. Antony's alliance with Cleopatra made him powerful, but it also made him enemies. Back in Rome, Octavian, the future Augustus, was spreading his own rumors. He told senators that Antony had gone soft, bewitched by a foreign queen who wasted Roman resources on pearl cocktails and Nile orgies. The gossip campaign worked. Cleopatra's yacht wasn't just a party boat. It became a symbol of decadence, used against them in propaganda wars. You wander below deck now, ducking through silk curtains. In one chamber, crates of treasure are stacked high. Gold, spices, ivory. Cleopatra wasn't just hosting parties for show. She was flaunting Egypt's wealth as if to say, Rome may be strong, but we have what you crave. The scent of cinnamon and frankincense fills the air, mingling with the ever-present perfume of roses. And yet, amid all this, you feel a flicker of melancholy. Cleopatra's charm was legendary, but charm doesn't hold forever. These yacht parties dazzled Antony and terrified Octavian, but they also painted Cleopatra as dangerous, excessive, perverted in the Roman sense of twisting tradition. Rome liked its women modest. Cleopatra? She was anything but. Still, imagine being on that deck. Wine in hand, music swelling, stars overhead, watching two of the most powerful people in the world laugh like teenagers skipping school. For a brief moment, it feels almost innocent. Almost. But you know where this ship is sailing. Toward Actium, toward war, toward tragedy. These golden nights on the Nile are the calm before the storm. Soon, Antony will gamble everything on Cleopatra, and the yacht parties will be remembered not as romance, but as evidence in a trial of history. You step back into the warm night, the sails glowing purple under torchlight. Cleopatra raises her glass, Antony leans in close, and the river carries you forward. You know the gossip will outlast them both. You are the king now. The crown rests heavy on your head, though you can still feel the ghost of the iron circlet they pressed against your brow at your coronation. The court sang praises that day, but today the hall feels different. Quiet. Watchful. The golden walls shimmer with torchlight, but every flicker seems to cast a new shadow. And in each shadow, you sense danger. Because here is a truth no one tells you before you sit on the throne. The palace itself is more dangerous than the battlefield. Armies are straightforward. You can see their banners, hear their drums, measure the size of their forces. But treachery? Poison? Whispers behind curtains. These things are invisible, and they come from those who smile at you in the day, only to sharpen daggers at night. The whisper of assassins. You do not even sleep soundly. A Roman king does not sleep like other men. Your bed is surrounded by guards, and still you lie awake, staring at the carved beams overhead. You imagine the footsteps of an assassin in the corridor, the quiet scrape of a blade against stone, the faint click of a door unlatching. It has happened before. King Tullus Hostilius, the third king, died mysteriously. They said Jupiter struck him with lightning for failing in his rituals. But some whisper that the priests of Rome, insulted by his arrogance, quietly arranged his death. If they could strike down a king by calling on the gods, or by pretending to, why not you? Each night, you taste the fear of poison in your mouth. The wine goblet glitters in front of you at supper. Do you drink it? Or do you wait for the cupbearer to sip first? What if he is bribed? What if the poison is slow and will kill him later, sparing the guests but not you? Every meal becomes a trial. Every swallow feels like a wager against fate. The watchful senators. The Senate watches you like wolves circling a stag. They are men of wealth, of old bloodlines, of ambition that burns brighter than the torches in the Curia. They nod when you speak, but their eyes do not follow their mouths. They measure every word you utter, every decree you issue, waiting for you to stumble. If you grow too strong, they whisper that you are a tyrant. If you appear too weak, they call you unfit. You must tread a razor's edge, always balancing pride and humility. Too much of either, and the Senate moves against you. And how does the Senate move? Not always openly. They spread rumors among the people. They bribe soldiers to question their loyalty. They persuade priests to declare omens unfavorable to your reign. Imagine standing before the people, trying to command authority, while a senator declares that the sacred chickens refused to eat that morning, a sign that the gods disapprove of you. What can you do against chickens? Against clouds shaped like daggers? Against birds flying in the wrong direction? The people believe, and their belief is as sharp as any sword. The servants who listen. Even the servants are dangerous. You see them bowing low, carrying trays of figs, arranging the king's robes. But servants hear everything. They stand quietly in the corners of rooms, heads bowed, ears wide open. They carry stories from one chamber to the next. By the end of the week, every whisper you shared with your advisors may be repeated in the kitchens. And once words reach the kitchens, they find their way into the streets. Soon, bakers and butchers are murmuring about your private thoughts. By the time those words return to the Senate, they are twisted into weapons. If you ever thought a servant was harmless, you would soon learn otherwise. A slave with access to your chambers might unlock the door for an assassin. A slave with access to your cup might lace your wine with something bitter. A slave who feels ignored or mistreated might trade your secrets for freedom. So you must trust no one fully. And that, perhaps, is the loneliest part of being king. The family's shadow. Even your family is a threat. Brothers, cousins, nephews, they all share your blood. And in Rome, blood is as much a curse as it is a bond. Imagine your younger brother watching you from across the hall, his face calm, his smile faint. Do you know what he thinks? Perhaps he is loyal. Or perhaps he dreams of being king himself. After all, why should you rule when he has the same lineage? Why should your children inherit the throne when his could just as easily? Brothers have killed brothers for less. Sons have betrayed fathers. Wives have whispered with enemies. Family is supposed to protect you. But in Rome, family is also the most likely to reach for the crown the moment it slips from your head. The curse of Tarquin. You might remember the tale of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the seventh and last king of Rome. They called him Superbus, the proud. He was not subtle. He ruled with arrogance, ignoring the Senate, seizing lands, silencing dissent with the sword. For a time, he seemed unstoppable. But pride gathers enemies like honey draws flies. When his son committed a terrible crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia, the people rose in fury. The Senate turned against him. Even his allies abandoned him. Tarquin was cast out of Rome, exiled forever. And from that day, the people swore there would never again be a king in Rome. When you wear the crown, you feel that story breathing down your neck. Every misstep you take, every harsh decree you issue, every insult you let slip, it brings you closer to Tarquin's fate. You are reminded daily that Rome has no patience for tyranny, yet no tolerance for weakness either. The king must be perfect, or he will be destroyed. The gods as witnesses. And then, there are the gods. Perhaps you believe in them. Perhaps you fear them. In Rome, it does not matter. The people believe, and so you must act as though their gaze is fixed on you at all times. A failed sacrifice, a misread omen, a ritual performed without care. Any of these might be taken as signs that the gods curse your reign. And when the people believe the gods curse you, they will abandon you. The Senate will move against you. Even your soldiers will hesitate to raise their shields in your defense. You are never simply ruling Rome. You are always performing for the gods, always trying to prove that your authority flows from Jupiter himself. Yet how can you, a mortal man, satisfy the hunger of the divine? Living in suspicion. So you walk the palace halls with suspicion as your closest companion. Every knock at the door makes you tense. Every unfamiliar face in the corridor sets your heart pounding. Every smile hides a possible dagger. You once thought being king meant freedom, but it is the opposite. You cannot leave the city without fear of ambush. You cannot sit at a feast without wondering if your plate has been tampered with. You cannot speak openly without fearing your words will be used against you. And so, though you sit on a golden throne, you live in a cage. A cage of suspicion, of danger, of endless watching. It is said that a Roman king never truly sleeps. His eyes may close, but his mind remains restless, always searching for threats. You settle deeper into your seat, the cushions of your imagined Roman chamber pressing against your back, and the oil lamp casting soft circles of light upon the tiled floor. The night continues, and with it, another peculiar chapter in this collection of strange Roman tales. This time, the whispers carry you into the private chambers of the imperial household, where rumor, intrigue, and perhaps a touch of scandal converge upon a name. Faustina the Younger, the Empress, the wife of the celebrated philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. It is strange, you think, to imagine Marcus Aurelius, the man whose words still echo through time in his meditations, whose philosophy encourages calm, discipline, and reason, sharing his household with whispers of something decidedly less stoic. The whispers say that Faustina, his empress, was captivated not by noble senators, not by great generals, but by gladiators, the muscled men of the arena whose fame came with blood, sweat, and the roar of crowds. As you close your eyes, you can almost picture the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum itself, its great arches rising against a Roman sky. Inside, gladiators stand in pairs, sweat shining on their skin, weapons glinting in the sunlight that pours down from the open top. The audience shouts, cheers, and stamps their feet upon the stone benches. Among them sits Faustina, adorned in silk and jewels, her expression calm on the surface, but, so rumor insists, her heart beating faster for the sight of men risking everything upon the sand. The story comes to you not in loud declarations but in whispers, the kind of rumor that spreads through servants' quarters and marble corridors. Some claim that Faustina was hopelessly in love with a gladiator, that she watched him fight with more intensity than mere entertainment should allow. Her affection, they say, crossed the line between curiosity and obsession. Others insist the tale was invented by jealous courtiers, eager to undermine the empress's reputation or to stain the name of the imperial family. And yet, the tale endured. Romans had long been fascinated by the figure of the gladiator. Though often slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, gladiators became icons of physical perfection and bravery. They stood at the strange intersection of horror and admiration. To die in the arena was cruel, but to fight bravely there was seen as noble. Women of Rome, noble and common alike, often let their admiration show more openly than was considered proper. Love notes scratched onto walls, tiny terracotta figurines, even poems all testify to a fascination that sometimes crossed into longing. In this atmosphere, it is perhaps not so surprising that an empress, surrounded by endless formality, might feel her heart stir at the raw vitality of an arena fighter. The philosopher's calm patience, while admirable, lacked the immediacy of a man fighting for his life in the sand. The whispers suggest that Faustina's fascination was not just fleeting, but all-consuming. One version of the rumor takes on an even more curious tone. It claims that Marcus Aurelius himself, hearing of his wife's feelings, went to consult the astrologers and magicians of the court. Their advice, bizarre and unsettling, was that Faustina should quench her desire by doing something unthinkable: to bathe in the blood of the gladiator she admired most. Then, once she had done this grim ritual, she would be purified, free to return her loyalty to her husband. The story goes that Marcus Aurelius agreed, that the gladiator was killed, his blood collected, and that Faustina was required to touch or even bathe in it before resuming her imperial role. The image is grotesque, the very opposite of what one expects from the dignified world of marble statues and Stoic philosophy. But this is precisely why the story survived. Because it shocked, because it contrasted so sharply with the noble image of Marcus Aurelius, the wise emperor, the reluctant ruler who wrote about virtue and justice in the quiet of his tent. As you sit in this imagined scene, you can almost hear the hushed tones in which the tale would have been repeated. Perhaps a senator leans close to another at a banquet, the sound of lyres filling the background as he whispers, "Have you heard? They say the empress herself desired one of the arena men." And his companion, eyes widening, shakes his head, more eager for gossip than for truth. Servants carrying trays of figs and wine would overhear and repeat the tale, until what may have been nothing more than slander had become a legend of its own. The truth, of course, is nearly impossible to know. Ancient biographers and historians were rarely free of bias. Some delighted in exposing the supposed corruption of emperors and empresses. Others, loyal to certain families, sought to protect reputations by omitting details. Faustina's own legacy is divided between praise for her role as mother to many imperial children and disdain for the rumors of infidelity that clung to her name. She bore Marcus Aurelius at least 13 children, among them Commodus, who would later become emperor himself. In official accounts, she is remembered as a dutiful empress, often traveling with her husband on campaigns and supporting him through difficult times. But the shadow of the gladiator's story lingers, even centuries later. It lingers because it speaks to something timeless: the fascination with the forbidden, the allure of strength and danger, the suggestion that even those who dwell in marble palaces might harbor desires that run against expectation. You think of Marcus Aurelius in this light. Did he know of the whispers? Did he care? Or did he, guided by his Stoic principles, treat them as distractions, mere noise in the wind? In his writings, he constantly reminds himself to remain indifferent to slander, to remember that others' opinions cannot truly harm the soul. Perhaps then, he heard the gossip and dismissed it with calm detachment. Or perhaps, beneath the philosopher's armor, he was still a man, and the thought of his empress enamored of a gladiator wounded him quietly. For you, reclining in your mental Roman chamber, the details hardly matter. What matters is the texture of the story, the flickering of lamplight, the faint rustle of silk in the arena stands, the sound of swords clashing, and the whisper of a secret that never fully faded. The tale of Faustina's gladiator crush may be truth, may be slander, may be something in between. But it reminds you of how human the ancients were, how their lives were threaded with the same mix of admiration, jealousy, longing, and scandal that fills stories across all ages. The night outside your chamber deepens. The oil lamp burns lower, the shadows lengthen, and the voices of rumor fade into silence. Faustina, Marcus, the gladiator, all dissolve back into history, leaving you with only the echo of their story. The Colosseum's roar dims. The imperial palace grows quiet, and you are left with stillness, your eyes heavier, your breath slower, as if the strange tale has wrapped you in a cloak of drowsy wonder. You awaken to the scent of something strange, a mix of sweetness and sourness, faintly creamy, faintly animal. You blink, and realize you are no longer sitting in the stone courtyards of Rome, but instead reclining in a warm chamber lined with mosaics. Sunlight filters in through narrow alabaster windows. The air smells not of wine or incense, but of milk. Lots of it. Your hand drifts over the edge of the polished marble basin you find yourself in, and it splashes into the warm liquid. You draw it back and stare. Yes, milk. A bath of milk. Donkey milk, to be precise, though you wouldn't know it until someone whispers it in your ear. You sink lower, feeling the smoothness of the fluid against your skin. The warmth is oddly comforting, coating your body in a soft layer, leaving your skin slick and supple. The chamber echoes faintly with footsteps. A group of servants bustle about, pouring in more pitchers of the thick white liquid, straining it carefully to remove clots, ensuring the bath is perfectly prepared. They chatter in hushed tones about their mistress, the woman for whom this ritual is performed daily. Poppaea Sabina. You hear her name whispered like a charm, like a warning. Poppaea, the second wife of Emperor Nero. The woman who, by some accounts, wormed her way into the imperial palace not just with beauty, but with cunning sharp enough to slice marble. She was known for her radiance, her pale complexion, and for the rituals she followed with religious devotion. Among them, these legendary donkey milk baths. The slaves adjust the curtains, letting in just enough light to make the milk gleam. It looks like a pool of pearl, shimmering, opaque. You watch as more donkeys are led in outside, their bleating faintly audible through the walls. They must be milked constantly, for Poppaea is said to demand that not a day pass without her immersion in this fountain of youth. You lean back, imagining her in your place. She would recline like a goddess, skin glowing, her hair crowned with diadems, attendants doting on her every need. To be beautiful in Rome is to be powerful, and she knew this truth better than anyone. Her beauty was a weapon, and these baths were her forge. You close your eyes and you drift, imagining yourself as one of her attendants. You would rise early before dawn to prepare the baths. The donkeys must be kept healthy, fed on the finest grain, pampered like noble steeds, for their milk is precious. Servants would strain the liquid through fine cloth, ensuring its texture was flawless, then pour it into marble basins warmed by bronze braziers. Poppaea would arrive later, her white robes falling from her shoulders, her gaze sharp enough to freeze you if you faltered in your duties. She would test the bath with her delicate foot, then sink in, sighing as though all the empire existed only to pamper her skin. You drift lower in the milk yourself, your body buoyant, the scent of the donkey milk clinging faintly to your nose. It is strange, alien, and yet you understand its allure. It softens. It soothes. It creates an illusion of timelessness, as if your flesh itself were being preserved like marble statues lining a forum. But beyond the bath lies the woman herself. Poppaea is not simply a patron of luxury. She is a mistress of intrigue. History remembers her as ambitious, perhaps cruel, a woman who maneuvered her way past rivals into Nero's bed and eventually to the throne as empress. Her first marriage had been to a praetor, her second to Otho, the very man who would later rule as emperor himself. But she abandoned him when a greater prize appeared. Nero, young, powerful, malleable. Poppaea knew how to flatter, how to manipulate. It is said she whispered poison into Nero's ear, urging him to rid himself of his mother Agrippina, that domineering figure who had guided his early reign. Imagine yourself in her inner circle. You stand near the bath's edge, hearing her speak with her handmaidens. Her words are soft, almost lazy, yet edged with steel. She discusses enemies, rivals, those who must be outshone or eliminated. Even here, in the sanctuary of milk and marble, she sharpens her claws. You realize the bath is more than vanity, it is armor. The glow of her skin, the aura of her beauty, is the sheen of her power. When she steps out, clothed and perfumed, she will confront senators, noblewomen, even Nero himself, and bend them to her will. Your eyes grow heavy as you listen to the imagined voices of her chamber. You hear the splash of water, the gentle trickle as milk pours from bronze pitchers. The room hums with routine. One servant massages Poppaea's shoulders with fragrant oils, another braids her hair. Outside, Rome bustles with noise, vendors, soldiers, children playing, but here, all is quiet, all is ritual. Time seems to slow. You imagine the donkeys again, lined up in their pens, their gentle eyes blinking as slaves gather their milk for the mistress. It takes dozens, perhaps hundreds, to satisfy her daily needs. A herd maintained purely for the indulgence of one woman. Some might call it vanity, others, extravagance. But in Rome, where emperors dine on flamingo tongues and senators decorate villas with gold leaf, who is to say what is excessive? You breathe deeply. The milk bath is warm, lulling you into stillness. You wonder if Poppaea truly believed it granted her eternal youth, or if it was more for the appearance, the whispers, the legends, the aura of otherworldly beauty. Even now, centuries later, her name is linked forever with the image of white liquid and alabaster skin. But beauty alone cannot save anyone from fate. History records that Poppaea's life ended tragically, violently. Nero, in a fit of rage, is said to have struck her while she was pregnant, ending both her life and the child's. Whether this tale is truth or rumor, no one can say with certainty, but the image is haunting. The woman who bathed in milk daily, preserving herself with such devotion, undone in an instant by a single act of brutality. You stir uneasily in your bath, milk rippling around you. The warmth that was once soothing now feels heavy, almost suffocating. You think of Poppaea's ambition, her triumphs, her beauty, all dissolved like cream into nothingness. The empire remembers her, but not as she might have wished. For every admirer of her radiance, there is a critic of her ruthlessness. Still, as you recline in the bath, you cannot deny the tranquility it brings. Your limbs grow heavy, your breath slow. The outside world fades away. You imagine yourself as Poppaea, worshipped for your fairness, feared for your cunning. Each drop of milk becomes a layer of protection, hiding your flaws, silencing your enemies. You sink deeper, until only your face remains above the surface. The milk cradles you, and you feel the boundaries of your body blur. You are not a person anymore, but a statue half submerged, pale and eternal. You are Poppaea in her prime, glowing with the artifice of luxury, untouchable in your marble chamber. You drift now into another imperial court, one that smells of marble dust, olive oil, and the faint trace of lavender incense. The years have shifted again, and you find yourself walking in the palace of Emperor Hadrian, whose passions lie not only in ruling Rome but also in art, architecture, and other distractions. At his side, officially and dutifully, is Vibia Sabina, his empress. She is quiet, almost ghost-like at first glance, but you will learn that silence does not mean emptiness. Silence, in her case, is armor. The corridors of the Palatine are wide and sunlit, but Sabina rarely commands the space like other empresses might. She glides rather than strides. Her gowns are carefully arranged, her jewelry modest compared to the gaudy tastes of Nero's women or the splendor of Domitia. To you, she appears understated, but her eyes, calm, steady, watchful, seem to be weighing every person who enters her line of sight. You are aware that Sabina did not choose her marriage with much joy. She was tied to Hadrian through family ties, politics, and the wishes of powerful relatives. Hadrian himself, though a brilliant strategist and a patron of the arts, was not known for warmth toward her. His heart, you overhear in court gossip, was given elsewhere, to young men, most famously to the Bithynian Antinous. For Sabina, the role of empress became less about partnership and more about performance. Imagine yourself standing in her chambers. The air is still. She sits at a writing desk, quill in hand, though her letters are less love notes and more records. Accounts, memoranda, observations. Her ladies attend her, but she allows them few words. You realize she commands her household not with volume, but with a kind of unyielding reserve. Her silence becomes its own language. Still, Rome is never quiet for long. In the markets, in the taverns, even in the Senate, there are whispers about Sabina. Some say she despises her husband. Others say she tolerates him only to maintain her status. Some even go further. Rumors slip through the cracks like ivy. Perhaps Sabina sought comfort elsewhere. Perhaps she found companionship in secret, hidden from Hadrian's indifferent gaze. You lean in, listening to the gossip of slaves who carry trays of wine at a banquet. They lower their voices so as not to be heard by the Praetorians. They say the empress entertains quiet company, one whispers. Not in the open, but behind veils, in gardens, on moonlit walks. No one dares name the man, or men. But the emperor does not ask, does not care. You imagine her walking through the palace gardens under moonlight, the gravel crunching beneath her sandals. Perhaps she lingers near the fountains longer than propriety allows, her head tilted toward a companion's shoulder. Perhaps she speaks then, in hushed tones, about all the things she never says in court. Whether these lovers are truth or invention, you realize that Rome thrives on stories like this, and Sabina's silence only feeds the fire. For the less she reveals, the more others will create in her stead. At court, Hadrian's passions are directed elsewhere. He organizes hunts, commissions statues, debates with philosophers, and dotes on Antinous. When Antinous dies tragically in the Nile, Hadrian is devastated, his grief immortalized in countless statues and cults spread across the empire. But where does that leave Sabina? You notice her seated beside him during ceremonies, her expression composed, untouched by tears. She has mastered the art of appearing supportive while withholding her soul. Her resistance is not rebellion in the form of daggers or poison, no. It is the refusal to yield her interior life to the emperor's neglect. In a society where empresses are often celebrated for fertility, Sabina remains childless. Some say it was choice, others fate, perhaps even deliberate withdrawal. Each interpretation adds to the myth of her defiance. You sense that in her quietude, she wields more power than if she screamed. Walk with her now into the temple porticos, where senators bow but murmur behind her back. Her steps are deliberate, her face a mask of serenity. She accepts honors when they are offered, but she does not gush with gratitude. Instead, she receives them as if they are obligations rather than gifts. You hear one senator mutter, "The empress has ice in her veins." Yet beneath that ice, you suspect, lies fire carefully contained. You recall the stories recorded by Cassius Dio, who hints that Sabina may have confided in others about her distaste for Hadrian. Some versions claim she accused him of cruelty, even of plotting against her life. Others insist she found ways to shield herself through alliances with trusted courtiers. Whether the details are exaggerated or not, the pattern is clear. Sabina endured, but never submissively. She endured with distance, with withdrawal, with private rebellion. Now picture her years later, when the burdens of marriage and the empire weigh heavier. Her hair is streaked with silver, her posture more rigid, yet her eyes remain sharp. You imagine her looking out over Rome from a balcony, the Tiber gleaming below, the sound of distant soldiers drilling in the camps. She has survived a life beside one of Rome's most celebrated emperors, but at what cost? She has left behind no children, no direct heirs, but her image, minted on coins, will remain, an impassive face of marble, preserving her silent defiance for centuries. And you, standing nearby, sense the paradox of her legacy. She is remembered not for her words, but for the lack of them. Not for her passionate outbursts, but for her restraint. In the hush of her presence, Rome projected its own stories. stories of quiet resistance, of hidden affairs, of a woman who endured a loveless union with dignity, and perhaps with secret rebellion. The palace grows dim as lamps are lit. You feel the cool marble beneath your feet as you walk away from Sabina's chambers. Her figure lingers in your mind, still, silent, watchful. History may never uncover the full truth of her heart, but you know enough to recognize her strength. To live beside Hadrian, yet not be consumed by him, required a defiance more subtle and enduring than any sword. And so you leave her, this empress who spoke little but said much. Her silence is a lesson, her endurance a kind of power. In the long line of imperial women, Sabina's story whispers differently, not in shouts of scandal or violence, but in the steady murmur of resistance that refused to vanish, even in the shadow of Rome's mightiest emperor. You breathe in slowly, letting the quiet of her defiance seep into you. The palace fades, the murmurs dissolve, and you drift onward to the next story in this endless tapestry of imperial intrigue. You wake up in a world of uneasy calm. Rome no longer feels like the same place it was under Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor whose meditations whispered about duty, stoicism, and restraint. His passing has left behind a Rome that now belongs to his son Commodus, a ruler with a taste for vanity, gladiator games, and reckless displays of power. And in the shadows of this new imperial household, you find yourself observing one of the empire's most dangerous women, Lucilla, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius, the sister of Commodus, and once an empress in her own right. Her story begins with privilege. Born into the purple, Lucilla grew up in the imperial palace, wrapped in marble corridors and schooled in philosophy as much as politics. Her father was the emperor, her mother Faustina the younger, a celebrated Augusta, and her bloodline carried the weight of Rome's destiny. Unlike many women of her time, Lucilla never had to wonder whether her life would matter. It was already written in history that it would. Her first marriage set her high on the throne of power. She was given in marriage to Lucius Verus, co-emperor with Marcus Aurelius, a man as charming as he was indulgent. You can almost hear the whispers of the court. Verus the handsome, Verus the lavish spender, Verus the emperor who brought victory from the eastern campaigns, but preferred to spend his days reclining at banquets. And beside him, Lucilla became Augusta, empress of Rome, mother of his children, and mistress of ceremonies. She wore the diadem and watched senators bow low. For a brief time, she was the most powerful woman in the world. But fortunes shift swiftly in imperial Rome. Lucius Verus died suddenly. Some said of disease, others whispered of poison. Lucilla's crown slipped away the moment his body grew cold. She was still the emperor's daughter, still wealthy and influential, but she was no longer empress. In the cruel calculus of Roman politics, she had moved down the ladder. Her father quickly remarried her, this time to a much older man, Tiberius Claudius Pompeianus, a loyal Syrian general of unimpeachable service, but far beneath her in social standing. You imagine Lucilla's bitterness, the sting of going from gilded ceremonies and imperial honors to being second wife to a grizzled soldier who was often away with the legions. She was still young, still vibrant, still with the memory of being adored as empress. To trade silks for shadows must have been unbearable. When Marcus Aurelius died, Commodus inherited the throne. At first, Lucilla likely thought she could influence him. After all, she was his older sister, raised with more dignity, perhaps wiser than the reckless young man who preferred the roar of the Colosseum to the tedium of councils. But Commodus was no Marcus. He surrounded himself with flatterers, indulged in extravagant gladiatorial fantasies, and allowed corruption to rot the state. And here lies the seed of Lucilla's downfall. Power, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. She had been empress. She had been adored by the people. To sit silently and watch Commodus tarnish their father's legacy was something she could not endure. Whether out of pride, ambition, or desperation, Lucilla entered the dangerous game of plots. You find yourself in the year 182 CE. The conspiracy takes shape in secret meetings, in whispers behind closed doors, in the flicker of oil lamps where Lucilla gathers disaffected senators and nobles. Her motive is clear. Remove Commodus and replace him, perhaps with herself or with her allies. It was bold, too bold. The plan was almost farcical in its execution. A young senator, impatient and rash, leapt out too soon to strike Commodus with a dagger. Instead of stealth, he shouted, "This is what the Senate sends you!" Before being wrestled down by guards. The plot unraveled in an instant. Names were given under interrogation. The conspirators were dragged to execution. And Lucilla? Being the emperor's sister, spared her immediate death, but not disgrace. Commodus was enraged, humiliated that his own blood had sought to spill his. He could not allow her to stay in Rome, where she might inspire further rebellion. She was banished to the island of Capri, the rocky, beautiful exile that had hosted many imperial castaways before her. You picture her pacing the cliffs, staring out at the endless blue of the Tyrrhenian Sea. A woman who once commanded the empire, now reduced to watching waves crash against stone. Did she regret the plot? Did she curse her brother's madness, or her own impatience? Perhaps both. But Commodus was not a man to forgive. In time, his paranoia deepened. He sent soldiers to Capri with orders clear and merciless. Lucilla was executed quietly, away from the public eye, her once shining legacy drowned in disgrace. The daughter of Marcus Aurelius, the sister of an emperor, the empress of a co-ruler, strangled in exile. What lingers most in your ears are not her final moments, but the echoes of her ambition. Lucilla's fatal schemes reveal the razor-thin line women of her rank had to walk in Rome. Too quiet, and they were forgotten. Too ambitious, and they were destroyed. She had dared to reach for power when her brother proved unworthy, and for that daring, she lost everything. And yet, her story has the strange flavor of tragedy more than villainy. She was no Messalina reveling in excess, no Agrippina orchestrating every murder with icy calculation. Lucilla's plot was clumsy, almost desperate. She was a woman who once had power and could not bear to let it go, who saw Rome slipping into chaos and tried, in her own reckless way, to stop it. As you lie back and listen, the soft voice of history makes her tale less scandalous than sorrowful. You are reminded that in the Roman Empire, family ties meant nothing when thrones were at stake. Even the daughter of a philosopher emperor could not escape the pull of ambition and the cruelty of politics. Her name lives on not in monuments or triumphant arches, but in whispered caution. Ambition can be fatal, even for those born to rule. And as you close your eyes, you almost see her, standing on Capri's cliffs, the wind tugging at her dress, the sea below endless and indifferent. Lucilla, once empress, now only a memory carried by the waves. You close your eyes and drift further into the story of Rome, and now the whispers turn to one of the most commanding women of all, Julia Domna. Unlike some of the wives and daughters who found themselves swept along by fortune, Julia is someone you cannot ignore. She is the very heir of the Severan dynasty, woven into every decision, every intrigue, and every whispered word in the marble halls of power. You imagine yourself once again in the imperial palace, perhaps in the early years of the 3rd century, when Rome seems to stretch endlessly across the world. The empire is vast, prosperous, yet uneasy, and at its heart sits a woman who seems destined to hold things together, even when the men around her falter. Julia Domna is no ordinary Roman empress. Born far away in Syria, in the city of Emesa, she comes from a family of priests who serve the sun god Elagabal. You feel the exotic weight of that background, as though Rome itself were reminded that not all its rulers must come from Italy. Julia is chosen as the wife of Septimius Severus, a general who rises from Africa to the purple robes of emperor. When he claims the throne after a bloody civil war, Julia becomes his partner not just in marriage, but in rule. You can almost see her beside him on campaign, not a timid spouse waiting in Rome, but a queen of the camps, walking among soldiers, speaking with advisors, carrying herself with dignity. Her dark, intense eyes mark her as a woman not to be underestimated. As you listen to the quiet hum of history, you realize Julia Domna is not content with ceremonial roles. She cultivates a circle of philosophers and thinkers, surrounding herself with sharp minds and deep conversation. Imagine yourself sitting in a shaded atrium, the sound of water dripping from a fountain, while intellectuals debate logic, ethics, and fate. Julia is there, asking questions, nodding thoughtfully, playing the hostess of ideas. To the Romans, she becomes the very image of wisdom and learning, so much so that she earns the title Mater Senatus et Patri, Mother of the Senate and the country. You breathe out slowly, knowing few women in history have ever commanded such respect. But Julia's influence is not always quiet. Her husband, Septimius Severus, is a man of war, and his reign is built on the sword. He campaigns in Britain, marches across Asia, and rules with firmness. Yet whenever he is absent, Julia remains as a stabilizing force. You imagine her correspondence, the letters flowing across provinces, her seal pressed into wax, her instructions carried to governors and generals. She is both empress and administrator, and people whisper that no decision is truly made without her hand guiding it. Even the Senate, so proud of its traditions, bends beneath her presence. And then, as history always moves, Severus dies. You hear the sighs of soldiers, the creak of the imperial bier, the long funeral rites. Rome must pass to his sons. Here, Julia Domna's true test begins. Her two boys, Caracalla and Geta, are placed side by side as co-emperors, but you can already sense the tension. Brothers rarely share power, and these two are no exception. Julia, their mother, becomes the only force holding them together. Imagine her sitting between them, her hands resting gently on each, reminding them of duty, of family, of the empire they must preserve. But the whispers grow darker. The rivalry sharpens. Rome becomes uneasy. The feud reaches its breaking point. Caracalla, the elder, ruthless and impatient, decides he will not share. One evening, in the palace itself, Geta is lured into what he thinks is a meeting of reconciliation. You can almost feel Julia's heart pounding, because she is there when the soldiers rush forward, when Caracalla's order is carried out, and her younger son is stabbed to death in her very arms. You hear the gasp, the cry that escapes her lips, as the lifeblood drains away. Imagine the weight of that moment. Your child slain, your family shattered, and yet you cannot crumble, because the empire still turns its gaze toward you. Julia does not weep in public. She endures. She lives on, because Rome itself needs her to. Caracalla rules alone now, and you can sense the change. He is harsh, suspicious, prone to cruelty. Yet through it all, Julia Domna remains by his side. She manages correspondence, keeps the wheels of bureaucracy turning, ensures that Rome does not dissolve under her son's volatile temper. Her palace becomes the center of administration. Petitioners, governors, and generals know that if they cannot sway Caracalla, perhaps they might appeal to Julia. And often, she listens. Imagine her seated at a desk, scrolls piled before her, wax tablets stacked high, her attendants bringing report after report. The empire flows through her hands. There are whispers, of course. Some murmur that Julia Domna is too close to her son, that her presence in his court is unusual, almost unsettling. Others suggest she manipulates him, bending his decisions for her own ends. But perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps she is merely trying to hold together a world that would otherwise fall apart. You breathe slowly, understanding that Julia's strength is born not of ambition alone, but of necessity. To survive in the imperial palace is always to play the game, but Julia plays it not for vanity, but for endurance. As you drift further into the story, Caracalla's fate comes into view. His reign, marked by cruelty and bloodshed, ends violently. On campaign in the east, he is assassinated by his own soldiers, cut down while relieving himself on the side of the road. News of his death reaches Julia, and you feel the silence in her chamber as the words are spoken. Her last surviving son, gone. Her dynasty, trembling. For Julia, the grief is unbearable. She refuses to eat, refuses to drink, and slowly wastes away. Some say she chose to die, that she starved herself deliberately, unable to bear the emptiness left behind. Others believe it was illness. But in the end, she follows her son into death, her influence finally extinguished. And yet, Julia Domna's shadow lingers. You can see her legacy in the Severan dynasty that continues after her, through nephews and cousins who claim the throne. You can feel her presence in the memory of philosophers who once debated under her patronage. And in the Senate, her title, Mother of the Country, remains a reminder that even in a world ruled by men, a woman could bend the empire with quiet, determined strength. You rest now in the stillness of that thought. Julia Domna was not a tragic whisper like some of the earlier empresses. She was not simply a pawn in schemes, nor merely a victim of betrayal. She was the web itself, the force that bound the strands of power together. For a time, Rome rested in her hands, and she held it with both intelligence and dignity. The empire would fracture, dynasties would rise and fall, but her place in history remains unshaken. As the lamps flicker in the corridors of memory, you let the story settle like a warm blanket, comforting and steady. You think you've finally earned a chance to breathe. After all the endless courts of emperors, their scheming wives, their unlucky daughters, and their tragic betrayals. But Rome has one more figure to introduce you to, and she is not a young wife with soft smiles or a grieving widow who moves silently behind her husband. She is something different. She is a grandmother, past the days of girlish charm or honeymoon laughter. She is Julia Misa, and in the twilight of her life she will do what few others ever could. Topple an empire's ruler, seat her own family upon the throne, and carve her name in history without ever needing to swing a sword. You watch her in her quiet Syrian villa, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp as they follow the movements of the empire. She has been watching for years, silent, waiting, gathering. The year is 217, and Rome is restless again. The Emperor Caracalla, son of Julia Domna, Misa's sister, has been murdered by one of his own officers. For a moment, the empire fell into the hands of Macrinus, a career soldier elevated to power, because he happened to be nearby when the last emperor fell. He is competent enough in the field, but Rome does not love competence alone. Rome loves spectacle. Rome loves dynasty. Rome loves the name of a family it can cling to. And Misa, wise old Misa, knows this truth. She knows that as long as she lives, as long as her bloodline is intact, the dynasty of the Severans, the family of her sister Julia Domna, the family of Caracalla, can rise again. You hear her whisper to her daughters in the lamplight, the smoke curling against the ceiling. Her voice is low but firm, the kind of voice that does not ask but commands. She tells them that the people still hunger for Caracalla, that they mourn him even though he was cruel, because cruelty is easier to forgive when it is wrapped in majesty. She tells them that Macrinus is already trembling, already unsure of his own authority, already hated by the soldiers who see him as an outsider, a bureaucrat in armor. And she reminds them of her grandson, young, beautiful, with the sharp cheekbones and curling hair that recall Caracalla's own face. He is only a boy, but to the soldiers and the crowd, he can be more. He can be an echo of Caracalla himself, a vessel for their longing. His name is Varius Avitus Bassianus, but soon the world will know him by another name, Elagabalus. You walk with her in the courtyards as she sets her plan in motion. Misa does not ride at the head of legions. She does not march into the Senate and declare herself ruler. Instead, she moves through webs of rumor and gold, weaving stories into the ears of discontented soldiers. She bribes commanders, whispers that her grandson is the rightful heir, the true son of Caracalla. She spreads tales that when Caracalla was alive, he had loved this boy, that perhaps he had even secretly adopted him. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. The truth is weaker than belief, and Misa understands belief better than anyone. The army listens. The army always listens when dynasties are in question. They march for glory, but they also march for stability, for the promise of a future that echoes the past. When they look upon the face of Elagabalus, still young and not yet hardened, they see Caracalla reborn. They shout his name, they swear their loyalty, and suddenly Macrinus is no longer emperor in the minds of the men who hold the swords. You feel the tremor of rebellion ripple across the empire. Macrinus tries to hold on, tries to summon loyalty with decrees and punishments, but it slips through his fingers like sand. Julia Misa sits in her villa, listening to the news, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. She has not lifted a blade, but the fate of Rome shifts with every whisper she spreads. She knows that armies move faster when hearts are convinced than when orders are shouted. When the battle finally comes, Macrinus is defeated. He flees, desperate, only to be captured and killed. And with that, Julia Misa's plan becomes reality. Her grandson Elagabalus is emperor. You can almost hear her sigh, half of triumph, half of exhaustion. For most grandmothers, victory is seeing their children secure or their grandchildren happy. For Misa, victory is nothing less than placing her bloodline upon the throne of the greatest empire in the world. But the story does not end with triumph. Because Elagabalus is no ordinary boy, and his reign will be like none other before him. He is high priest of the sun god Elagabal, a Syrian deity whose worship is strange and alien to the Roman people. He drags his sacred stone across the empire, parading it into Rome itself, insisting it is greater than Jupiter, greater than Mars. He dresses in silks, surrounds himself with eunuchs, scandalizes senators with his defiance of Roman tradition. You watch the Senate shiver in outrage. You hear the mutters of the people who whisper that the empire has been given to a child who plays at being emperor. And through it all, you see Julia Misa watching, silent, her face unreadable. Some say she regrets it, that she begins to fear what she has unleashed. Others say she does not care, that all she desired was the restoration of her dynasty, no matter the cost. You cannot read her thoughts, but you know one thing. She does not stop moving pieces. Even when Elagabalus begins to lose the army's support, even when Rome itself begins to turn against him, she is already planning the next step. She has another grandson, steadier, more disciplined, less reckless, Severus Alexander. And she is ready to shift her loyalty if it means survival. The soldiers grow restless, and eventually, the whispers rise again. Elagabalus is too strange, too wild, too unwilling to bend to Roman expectations. The Praetorians turn on him, killing him and his mother in a brutal purge. Yet Julia Misa does not fall with them. She remains patient, directing her influence toward Alexander, guiding him into power. She has lost one grandson, but she has secured another, and in that survival, she proves herself again the quiet architect of dynasties. You lean back, weary, your mind thick with the weight of it all. Julia Misa never led an army, never claimed the throne, never stood in the Senate to demand her place. And yet, she shaped emperors, toppled rulers, and restored her family's rule when it seemed lost forever. She fought not with swords, but with patience, cunning, and gold. Her rebellion was not shouted in the streets but whispered in corridors, paid for in coins and sealed in belief. And because of that, she carved a place for herself in history, one as enduring as any empress or warrior before her. You close your eyes, imagining her one last time. The old woman seated in her Syrian villa, firelight flickering across her face, her lips moving in low conversation, her hands folded in her lap. She is not young. She is not beautiful. But she is powerful, perhaps more powerful than any of the queens or empresses before her. She is Julia Misa, the grandmother who rebuilt an empire with nothing but her shadowy rebellion, and in the quiet of the night, you understand why Rome will never forget her. You are no longer drifting through marble palaces or perfumed banquets of scheming empresses. Instead, you are seated in a humbler space, one lit not by the gold lamps of Rome, but by oil lanterns in a small Christian chapel. The air here is not thick with politics, but with incense, psalms, and quiet hope. The woman before you is not dressed in imperial purple, not adorned with emeralds or pearls, but she carries something far heavier than jewelry, the weight of a new faith. She is Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, and the world is about to shift beneath your feet once again. You hear the whispers of the past. Rome, for centuries, had hunted down Christians. Their gatherings were illegal, their sacred books burned, their bodies fed to beasts in arenas where crowds roared louder than prayers. You remember it because you were there in earlier chapters, watching Faustina cheer gladiators, watching Nero's court sneer at mercy. But now the story takes a turn you would never have predicted. Helena, born in a modest innkeeper's family in the province of Bithynia, or perhaps humble Dacia, was not raised to be an empress. She was a tavern maid, a woman of little standing, someone who might have served you sour wine on your travels, if fate had not swept her into the orbit of Constantius Chlorus, a rising military commander. With him she bore a son, Constantine. Yet Constantius abandoned her, when political ambition demanded a more prestigious wife. Helena faded into the background, cast aside like a forgotten coin. But Constantine, her only child, never forgot her. Now you sit beside her, years later, as her son rises to supreme power. Constantine has done the unthinkable. He has legalized Christianity, once the most despised of sects, and set it on the road to becoming the beating heart of empire. The Edict of Milan in 313 opens doors that had long been barred. And in gratitude, Constantine recalls his mother, raising her from obscurity, clothing her in the dignity of Augusta, Empress Mother of the Roman world. But Helena wears this role differently than the other empresses you've known. Where Julia Domna spun webs of intrigue, where Lucilla sharpened daggers, where Poppaea soaked in vanity, Helena takes the imperial treasury and turns it toward piety. She does not scheme to place lovers on the throne. She dreams of the Holy Land, the places where Christ walked, bled, and rose. So, you walk with her. Imagine the long caravan leaving Rome and moving eastward, across the Mediterranean by ship, through the deserts and hills of Palestine. You can smell the dust kicked up by donkeys, hear the clatter of soldiers escorting the elderly Augusta, feel the heat pressing against your skin. Helena, by now well into her 70s, refuses to let age stop her. She insists on leading this pilgrimage herself. She does not send envoys, she goes. Her eyes gleam with something different than ambition. It is devotion, quiet but fierce. You arrive in Jerusalem, a city scarred by centuries of conflict and suppression. The Jewish temple is long gone, replaced by Roman shrines. Christians here live cautiously, though less hunted now than before. Helena listens to them, prays with them, and begins searching. Her question is bold. Where are the relics of the Passion? Where is the true cross, the very wood upon which Christ was crucified? The quest feels impossible. 300 years have passed since the execution on Golgotha. Empires have risen and fallen. Stones have been moved, shrines built and destroyed. Yet Helena persists. She questions the locals, consults bishops, prays in chapels, and wanders ruins. Finally, stories converge. Beneath a Roman temple to Venus lies the hill of Calvary, the place of crucifixion. You descend with her as laborers tear away the pagan shrine stone by stone. Dust fills the air, and the clang of chisels rings out. Days stretch into weeks until, buried deep beneath, 3 crosses are unearthed. But which one bore Christ? Which held the Savior of the world, and which were the crosses of the thieves who died beside him? A miracle, the chroniclers say, settled the question. A sick woman, near death, was brought to the site. One by one the crosses were touched to her. 2 did nothing. The 3rd healed her instantly. You watch Helena's face as tears roll down her cheeks, wrinkled, weathered, yet radiant with awe. She has found it, the true cross. From here her pilgrimage widens. She orders the construction of churches, monuments that will stand for centuries. In Bethlehem, over the cave where Christ was born, she raises the Church of the Nativity. In Jerusalem, on the site of Golgotha and the tomb, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre rises like a stone hymn. These buildings are not just architecture. They are anchors for faith, shaping the pilgrimage routes of Christians for 1,000 years. You notice something else. Helena is not hoarding relics for herself, nor selling them as trinkets for power. She distributes fragments of the cross to churches across the empire, allowing countless believers to feel connected to the central mystery of their faith. She gives alms freely, supports widows, rescues the poor. Unlike the extravagance of Poppaea's baths or the cruelty of Lucilla's plots, Helena's legacy is generosity woven with devotion. Still, she is an empress, and power clings to her even in piety. You hear whispers that her presence strengthens Constantine's legitimacy, that her pilgrimage doubles as a public declaration. Rome itself now bows before the God of the Christians. Faith and politics, once at war, now merge in the figure of this elderly woman walking barefoot on holy ground. At night you sit with her beneath the stars of Palestine. She speaks softly, telling you of her youth, of being cast aside, of loneliness. She admits she never thought she would see her son change the destiny of Rome. And then she looks at you with eyes steady and calm, and she says, "Empires crumble, but faith can outlast stone." The words settle over you like a lullaby. When Helena dies, likely in her late 80s, Constantine mourns her deeply. He buries her in a mausoleum near Rome, surrounding her sarcophagus with grandeur. Yet her true monument lies not in stone, but in the churches she built, the relics she preserved, the faith she nurtured. For centuries, pilgrims will walk the same paths you just walked with her, touching the stones she touched, kneeling where she knelt. You realize that unlike so many other empresses, schemers, lovers, survivors, Helena's power came not from whispers in corridors or daggers in the dark, but from devotion. She was not merely Constantine's mother, she became the mother of Christian pilgrimage. And as you close your eyes, the echoes of arenas and palaces fade away, leaving only the sound of quiet prayers carried on desert winds. You are drowsing under flickering lamplight, and once again you drift into another chamber of the long corridor of emperors and empresses, where silk rustles faintly in the still air. The room you now enter is richer, brighter, and filled with whispers that sound almost like the wings of birds. It is here that you encounter the life of Theodora, a woman who began in the lowest shadows of society and climbed, step by deliberate step, into the golden radiance of imperial power. Her story is one of transformation so improbable that even the chroniclers, skeptical and often cruel, could not avoid weaving her tale into the great tapestry of Rome and Byzantium. You find yourself wandering the theater districts of Constantinople, the laughter of the crowd echoing through the hippodrome, the smell of animals, sweat, and excitement in the air. In those early days, Theodora was nothing more than a performer's daughter, thrust into the world of circus and stage because that was the lot her family's station allowed. Her father had worked with the beasts of the hippodrome, perhaps taming bears or training horses, before dying early and leaving his family in hardship. Her mother, desperate to keep food on the table, pushed her daughters into performance. for in Constantinople the stage was both livelihood and trap. Actors and actresses were admired on the surface, yet beneath that admiration lurked contempt. Respectable society, with its rigid Christian moralizing, viewed the theater as a place of moral compromise. Still, it offered survival, and so Theodora learned to smile, to dance, to catch the eye of men with gestures carefully calculated to please. The chronicler Procopius, who wrote both praise and venom about her, described lurid tales of her early life, stories that may have been twisted to tarnish her memory but reveal nonetheless the suspicion she aroused. Whether true or exaggerated, they painted a picture of a young woman forced to use wit, performance, and her body as tools to carve out a space in a city where the poor were invisible. You sit quietly at the edge of a stage, watching her perform, her movements quick, her expressions sharper than those of the other actresses. She has something more, a spark, a resilience that refuses to let the audience, or fate, consume her whole. Theodora's life turned when she left the stage behind and followed a provincial governor to North Africa, a relationship that carried her far from Constantinople but not into safety. There, in distant lands, she endured hardship, betrayal, and perhaps exploitation. But the journey hardened her. She returned to the capital changed, not just a performer anymore, but a woman who had measured the width of the empire and found herself capable of surviving it. By then she had converted to Christianity, drawn to a life that emphasized piety, charity, and devotion. When you imagine her kneeling in a dim church, candles flickering on painted icons, you realize how striking her transformation was. The actress recast herself as a penitent, a servant of God, all while preparing for the greater stage to come. The meeting with Justinian altered everything. He was the nephew of Emperor Justin I, a man of sharp intelligence, legal talent, and restless ambition. Unlike many men of his rank, Justinian did not dismiss Theodora for her past. Instead, he admired her wit, her directness, her political instinct. She had lived where survival required calculation. She had performed before hostile crowds. She knew how to read faces, how to bend words into weapons. To Justinian, she was not a liability but an ally, someone who could stand beside him as he pursued his vision of restoring Rome's greatness. Their relationship scandalized the court. Laws forbade senators and men of high office from marrying actresses, but Justinian changed the law itself to make her his wife. It was not just an act of love, it was an act of political will, bending the empire to his choice. You drift along marbled halls now, hearing footsteps echo across mosaics that shimmer with gold. Theodora is no longer the stage girl. She wears imperial robes, heavy with jewels, and her gaze is steady, commanding. Courtiers bow, though some with clenched teeth, knowing that the empress sees more than she reveals. Her influence on Justinian was immense. She did not stand behind him silently. She argued, advised, even defied him. Together they became a rare pair in history, an emperor and empress who acted in tandem, their rule a partnership rather than a solitary reign. The most famous moment of her courage came during the Nika riots of 532, when Constantinople itself seemed on the edge of ruin. The hippodrome roared with chants, factions of the racing clubs united in fury, and soon the streets filled with fire and chaos. Justinian, overwhelmed, considered fleeing the city. His advisors whispered of ships waiting in the harbor, of safety across the waters. Yet Theodora stood firm, her words cutting through fear like steel. She reminded them all that purple, the color of imperial robes, was a noble shroud, that death as an empress was preferable to life as a refugee. Her calm resolve stiffened Justinian's wavering courage. The decision was made. They would fight, and fight they did, sending loyal troops to slaughter thousands in the hippodrome. The rebellion was crushed, the throne preserved, and Theodora's voice had been the fulcrum on which history turned. In quieter moments, her policies revealed her empathy for women and the vulnerable. She championed reforms that prohibited trafficking of young girls, expanded the rights of women in divorce and property disputes, and offered protection to actresses who, like her younger self, lived on the edge of society's disdain. You picture her speaking softly to a group of women, assuring them that the law could now stand on their side. To the men of the Senate, these measures may have seemed minor, but to those affected, they were lifelines. It is easy to imagine her walking through the women's quarters of a palace, pausing to listen, her presence both regal and human. Not all accounts were kind. Procopius, in his secret history, painted her as a tyrant, manipulative, even cruel, a woman whose ambition knew no bounds. But historians since have debated whether these stories reflected her true nature or the resentment of men unable to accept a woman in power. The contrast is sharp. In public monuments, she appears as serene, saintly, haloed in mosaic in the great church of Hagia Sophia. There she stands beside Justinian, offering a golden chalice to Christ, her face solemn and dignified. In private gossip, she was cast as monstrous, excessive, domineering. Between the two extremes lies the truth. A woman who had risen far beyond what society allowed, whose presence on the throne disturbed those who preferred their empresses silent. As you wander deeper into the palace corridors of memory, you sense the shadow of her final years. She died relatively young, in her late 40s, likely of cancer. Justinian, devastated, never remarried. He continued to rule for decades, but those who knew him said that without Theodora, something vital had been lost. Her tomb in the Church of the Holy Apostles, now long gone, once stood among the resting places of emperors, proof that the actress from the Hippodrome had secured her place among the rulers of the Roman world. You lean against a marble column, letting your eyes close, and you think of the arc of her life. From a girl who entertained the crowds with dances and laughter, to an empress whose words steadied an empire in revolt, her journey embodies resilience in its purest form. Her name endures not only in the stone and glass of mosaics, but in the memory of laws she shaped, reforms she inspired, and a throne she shared as an equal. In the great chain of imperial women, Theodora's link is forged from defiance and survival, glittering still after the centuries. And as you drift further into sleep, you hear the faint echo of applause, not from a stage of rough wooden boards, but from the vaulted dome of history itself, where her story continues to be performed endlessly, for those who wander the corridors of time. You open your eyes and the murmur of prayers greets your ears. Candles burn softly, their light flickering across stone walls painted with golden icons. The smell of incense drifts heavy through the air, filling your lungs with a sense of stillness. You are no longer in the chaotic courts of scandalous empresses or the glittering banquets of imperial Rome. Instead, you stand within the quiet, disciplined world of Constantinople in the early 5th century. And here, a woman has seized power, not with seduction, not with lavish displays of wealth, not even with military might, but with piety, restraint, and strategy. Her name is Pulcheria, sister of Theodosius II, and the empire itself bends to her will, cloaked in prayer. From the moment she was a child, Pulcheria understood the role she was expected to play. She was born into the Theodosian dynasty, surrounded by the endless squabbles of bishops, generals, and imperial relatives. Constantinople was no quiet city. It throbbed with theological disputes that could erupt into riots, with courtiers maneuvering for advantage, and with the constant threat of barbarian invasions. Yet Pulcheria's most dangerous battlefield was her own family's court. Her brother, Theodosius II, was mild-mannered, more interested in theology and scholarship than in governing. That left a vacuum. And where there is a vacuum, someone will step in. You are there when Pulcheria, barely 15 years old, takes a step that shocks the court. She declares a vow of virginity. Before an assembly of bishops and courtiers, she promises to remain celibate, to dedicate her life to God rather than marriage. You hear gasps ripple across the chamber. Why? Because this vow does more than proclaim religious devotion. It removes her from the web of political marriage alliances. No husband, no competing male power. By sacrificing the ordinary life of a princess, Pulcheria carves out something far more valuable: independence. From then on, the court changes. You walk with her as she organizes her household of sisters like a miniature convent. They wear simple garments, they fast, they pray, they embroider church vestments rather than adorn themselves with jewels. The palace becomes less a place of feasting and more a chapel of discipline. But do not mistake her austerity for weakness. Pulcheria is anything but passive. In fact, her very piety becomes a weapon. As you drift through the corridors of power, you hear whispers. Pulcheria rules through prayer, but she rules. She advises her brother, guides his decrees, and ensures her influence is stamped upon the empire's policies. She promotes Orthodox Christianity, fiercely opposing any bishop or sect she considers heretical. At council after council, her voice, though never raised in public debate, echoes through the decisions of the church. You realize you are watching not just a sister protecting her brother, but a strategist binding imperial authority to religious authority, welding throne and altar together with chains that will last centuries. But court politics are never so simple. Pulcheria's dominance does not go unchallenged. One of her brother's favorites, a eunuch named Chrysaphius, whispers into Theodosius's ear, attempting to undermine her influence. Others resent the severity of her court, where amusements are curtailed and laughter seems unwelcome. Yet Pulcheria survives these challenges by playing her role to perfection. The devout sister, the tireless servant of God, the unselfish protector of the emperor. She cannot be accused of greed or lust. Her very reputation shields her like armor. You accompany her on one of her most dramatic acts of influence, the Council of Ephesus in 431. Theological disputes rage like wildfire. Was Mary truly the Mother of God, or merely the mother of Christ's human nature? The stakes are enormous, for doctrine is power, and whichever side triumphs will gain control over the Church and its wealth. Pulcheria, fiercely devoted to the Virgin Mary, throws her full weight behind the title Theotokos, God-bearer. When the council confirms it, her reputation soars. Ordinary people across the empire cheer her as the protector of the Virgin's honor. You see her image stitched into church mosaics, her name spoken in the same breath as saints. She has not just influenced politics, she has shaped the theology of Christianity itself. And yet, this woman of prayer is not without ruthlessness. You notice how skillfully she navigates her opponents. Those who resist her vision find themselves quietly exiled, demoted, or cut off from imperial favor. Pulcheria never raises a sword, but bishops tremble when her letters arrive. Her power is subtle, veiled in the language of faith, but it is no less sharp than the dagger of a scheming courtier. Years pass, and you see her brother Theodosius die unexpectedly in a riding accident. Suddenly the throne is empty, and the empire trembles. Who will rule? Pulcheria, now in her 40s, makes a decision as shocking as her vow of virginity decades earlier. She marries. But not out of love. Her husband, Marcian, is a respected soldier, and their union is purely political. She makes clear that she will remain a virgin even within marriage. The people accept this strange compromise because they know what it means: stability. By joining her authority to Marcian's military strength, she keeps the empire from collapse. You walk alongside her as she continues to shape policy, promoting orthodoxy and building churches dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Constantinople fills with basilicas bearing her imprint, mosaics glowing with divine light. Pilgrims stream to these shrines, whispering her name with reverence. Yet you also see the weariness in her face, the toll of decades spent balancing piety and politics. Her strategy has preserved the empire through storms of heresy, invasion, and internal intrigue. And when at last she dies in 453, she leaves behind more than monuments. She leaves a model of power, unlike any other empress before her. Pulcheria showed that in a world dominated by men, a woman could carve authority not by seduction or scandal, but through the sanctity of faith, through discipline, through strategy. Her virginity had been her shield, her piety her sword, her intelligence her throne. As you step back from the candlelit basilica where her body lies entombed, you realize the paradox of Pulcheria's life. She renounced the pleasures of the world, yet gained more influence than many emperors. She proclaimed humility, yet wielded authority over bishops and generals. She cloaked herself in prayer, yet guided the fate of millions. You drift away into the silence of night, the echo of chanting monks fading behind you, and you understand. Pulcheria ruled not despite her restraint, but because of it. You wander into the cool marble halls of Constantinople, that city of shifting gold and shadow, where domes catch the sunlight like shields and mosaics whisper stories from another world. The year is the late 8th century, and you find yourself in the time of Irene of Athens, a woman who wrapped herself in velvet piety and iron ambition. She is not merely an empress consort, not merely a regent, but something altogether more dangerous. A mother who would rather unmake her son than surrender power. You drift slowly into her world, where incense lingers in the air of Hagia Sophia and courtiers murmur in tones too low to carry, fearful that even the mosaics may be listening. Irene had begun in Athens, an orphan who was plucked from obscurity to marry into the imperial household. She was beautiful, yes, but it was not her face that would linger in history. It was her calculation. She married Leo IV, son of Constantine V, and soon became the mother of Constantine VI. Leo was frail, a man haunted by illness, and when he died, Irene was left as regent for her young son. This was the moment she first tasted real authority. You picture her seated on a golden throne, the child emperor beside her, while ambassadors from foreign lands bowed and generals awaited her nod. She learned quickly, her gaze sharp, her movements measured, as though she were always testing how much she could bend the empire to her will. You walk with her through the corridors of power, where the most pressing issue was not armies or taxes, but icons, painted images of Christ, the Virgin, and saints. For decades, emperors had smashed and banned them, seeing idolatry in the colors and gold leaf. Irene, however, believed in their holy presence. To restore the icons was to win the devotion of monks, bishops, and the people. And so she called the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, where bishops gathered under her authority and declared that icons were not idols but windows into the divine. You imagine her seated behind a lattice, her face hidden but her will unmistakable, as bishops thundered their decrees. In that moment, she reshaped Christianity, and her name would always be tied to the return of holy images. But while the monks sang her praises, others watched uneasily. Her son Constantine was growing older, and a son was meant to rule. Yet Irene had no intention of slipping quietly into the background. She clothed herself in imperial purple, took part in ceremonies reserved for emperors, and issued decrees under her own name. The boy emperor was treated almost as an ornament. When he was crowned as co-emperor, it was less a gesture of power than of convenience. Still, a boy grows into a man, and Constantine VI began to resent the iron hand of his mother. You hear the whispers in the palace halls, soldiers murmuring that the young emperor is weak, but still the rightful ruler. Monks debating whether obedience lies with the son or the mother. Aristocrats shifting uneasily, wondering whether to support Irene's wisdom or Constantine's birthright. The city itself seems divided, like a house with two masters. You can almost feel the tension in the air, a tension that clings like incense smoke. Constantine tried to assert himself, and for a while, he even ruled alone. But his reign was marked by blunders. ill-fated wars, unpopular decisions, and personal scandals. He blinded generals suspected of treachery, divorced his wife to marry another, and alienated the church. In each mistake, Irene found her opening. She returned again and again into the center of power, her calm presence contrasting with his erratic rule. She smiled serenely, cloaked in piety, as though she were merely guiding events with a mother's hand, yet beneath that calm smile, a plan hardened. You stand beside her now in the imperial palace, in the year 797. Constantine has finally tried to cast her aside, but Irene has gathered her supporters in the shadows. Senators, palace guards, even clergy. Many prefer the steady hand of the mother to the stumbling will of the son. Orders are whispered, conspiracies sewn like threads into a tapestry. On a morning heavy with tension, Constantine is seized. You walk in the shadows of the corridors as soldiers drag the emperor into a chamber where light filters weakly through high windows. The order is given. His eyes are gouged out. You do not look directly, but you hear the muffled cry, the shuffling of boots, the silence afterward. Irene has done what no mother before her dared. She has extinguished the sight of her son to secure her throne. When Constantine is carried away, broken and blinded, the empire no longer has two rulers. It has one. And that one is Irene. The city reels. Some gasp in horror, others nod in grim approval. In the eyes of many, she has crossed the boundary of natural law. A mother was meant to protect her child, not mutilate him. Yet others see divine providence, that God has favored her and given her authority to rule alone. And so Irene becomes the first woman in Roman history to rule the empire not as a regent, not as a consort, but as Basilius, emperor in her own right. She does not call herself empress. She takes the full, masculine title, asserting that power has no gender when wielded with certainty. You wander through the great court of Hagia Sophia, where her image is placed among the emperors of old. She restores the use of icons, sponsors churches, and presents herself as a pious mother of the faithful, even as she is shunned as an unnatural mother to her son. Her reign is marked by diplomacy, by negotiation with Charlemagne in the West, by efforts to steady the empire after years of unrest. Yet always in the shadows whispers remain. She blinded her own child. The mosaics seem to look down in judgment, their glassy eyes holding questions no priest can answer. Her downfall comes not with fire or riot, but with betrayal from within her own court. In 802, officials weary of her rule conspire against her, raising a new emperor, Nikephoros, to the throne. Irene is seized, stripped of her purple robes, and exiled to the island of Lesbos. You see her there, seated in a modest room, weaving to sustain herself, her hands moving slowly over rough threads. Once she commanded armies, councils, and emperors. Now she weaves in silence, her reign reduced to memory and scandal. As you linger beside her, she seems less monstrous and more tragic. She was a woman in a world that allowed no room for women, forced to claw her way to authority through the only means available: cunning, piety, and betrayal. Her greatest sin was the mutilation of her son. Yet her greatest triumph was proving that a woman could wear the imperial diadem not as a caretaker but as a sovereign. You feel the contradiction of her life settle over you like a heavy cloak. Holy and unholy. The sea winds of Lesbos rattle the shutters. Irene, once the mistress of Constantinople, dies quietly in exile, remembered as both saint and monster. You leave her side, stepping out into the starlit silence of the empire, carrying with you the uneasy truth. Sometimes in history, love and ambition collide with such force that one must be destroyed.